Hello, Microsoft Build attendees. Welcome to our session. Thank you for joining us. This is the Ask the Team Anything session with the Azure Logic Apps team. I'm just going to go through some intro stuff and then we're going to get started, hopefully answering your questions successfully. Feel free to start posting those questions in the chat and the team will start looking at those and we'll get to answering them and hopefully help you out. Just to go through quickly the agenda of what we're doing today. I'm doing it now, what to expect. I'll give you some introductions to some of the team on the call. We do have a few members of the team lurking there as attendees as well. So hopefully we'll be able to get your questions answered super quickly. We'll then go over to the open question and answer, and then we'll wrap up and close. So there's just some guidance here about how to engage. So use the chat box to answer questions. Post anonymously or use your name. I mean, it's nice to know who you are, but you don't have to. We'll be looking at your questions and come in as they come in, and then once we're going to answer them, we'll approve them. Upvote your favorites so we know which ones are really, really important to you, and then we'll do our best to answer them verbally, but we might actually post some answers in the chat as well, depending on how many we need to get through. And we'll try and answer the most popular ones first. This session is recorded, apparently. Don't spam the chat. We'll do our best to get through them as quickly as you can, but look for other people answering the same questions, and then make sure you adhere to the code of conduct, which of course I'm not going to read through in entirety, but there it is. We go. So, little PowerPoint delay. There we go. So who have we got on the chat? So John is with us. I'm Matt Farmer. Divya is on the call, I suspect, and Derek is monitoring the chat and running the show for us. So with the Logic Apps program management team, who was that?
That was John.
Oh, hey, John. Thought something had gone horribly wrong then. So feel free to say hi, and we'll do our best to help you out. So some ideas on things you can ask us about. Of course, this is Ask Us Anything, so you're welcome to ask me about my lovely spare bedroom decor, but probably the best things are ask us about Logic Apps and how you're getting on with them. If you're using them right now and have questions, then pop those in the chat. Or if you're thinking about using them and wonder how to use them as part of your app development experience, let us know. You can also ask us things about the integration service environment, which is the dedicated tier for Logic Apps for enterprise. Our thoughts on low and no code for developers and how we see that developing. You can ask us those. We love those high level questions about future patterns. That would be great. You can ask us about iPaaS, integration platform as a service. Something that when we talk to people like Gartner, Logic Apps is part of, and the wider Azure integration suite of tooling, so things like API management, Service Bus, how they fit in with Logic Apps. You're welcome to ask us those questions as well. So I'm going to leave that up for a second, but I'm going to just jump across to the chat window, and then I can see myself in the window. Hello, me. Let's get started. So Derek, do you want to help us? I'm looking at the published questions, so we'll start to pick off some of those. We've already had an answer about the DB2 write with DB2, so we should support that, but let's look at some of the others that we do. I'm looking for John and Derek to kind of call out ones we think we should answer as well as we read through.
I see one from Ellen, question on run ID. How is the string formulated and whether I can pass in my own run ID or not? So the run ID is randomly generated by the Logic App engine, but there is another parameter that you can pass in called run sequence ID or client tracking ID that we will preserve whatever value you pass in, and we allow you to query it so you can find runs of a particular ID that you specified. Hopefully that answered your question.
So I'm just looking through the questions as we got, yeah, post them in the chat. I see them coming in. So we'll have a look through some of the ones we published there. I'm just going to answer this one. So we've got this one. Of course, it disappears when I go and publish it. If I've written a function app to call SOA web services like NetSuite, which is not possible using the regular connector, how can I make use of this in Logic App? So if the function app is an HTTP function app, so you could just call it as a function app, but what you could also do is you could publish that as a custom connector. So that then you can call it like any other Logic Apps connector from Logic Apps into functions and then into NetSuite. So I don't know the details of your implementation, but if you've set that up to respond with JSON, obviously then that's easy to use in Logic Apps, but you can also use XML, obviously. I know NetSuite's APIs, I believe a lot of them are XML, so you can still do that within the Logic Apps using a custom connector.
Cool. I will take next one. Here we have Raj asking, can we create API connections dynamically through APIs? So below the question, I just posted a blog post from a while ago talking about how to create API connections via ARM templates, and you can do very similar things by following the blog, but instead of calling into ARM, just calling into the API directly. So take a look and let us know if you have any questions.
I'm just answering one of them here around, I've got a function app to call NetSuite because we don't have a connector for that. How can I call that from a Logic app? So we have functions integration with Logic Apps. So if you have an existing function app with a function in it, then you can just make a call to that function from the Logic app.
I did actually just answer that one, John.
Oh, did you?
But the thing is, you were reading, looking for questions while I was answering it. So I think we're adding to the entertainment value of this session.
Awesome.
It is quite difficult to read and at the same time. We've got a question down there. In Visual Studio, is it possible to publish one Logic app to many customers just by creating different parameters file? I think that's from Arne. I think we need to clarify what you mean by publish to customers there. So yes, you can. So we can definitely. There was a new feature we added earlier in the year. In fact, Derek PM'd it. That allows you to parameterize certain parts of the Logic app. But I think in terms of customers, if you mean different subscriptions, then theoretically, yes, you could take the Logic Apps definition and then publish that to different subscriptions. I think it would depend on exactly how that your customers are set up when you talk about them. If those are customers within your own tenant, then you just need to parameterize certain functions within that. If you go into the Logic Apps Designer, you should be able to see parameters button in the top of the designer that will allow you to swap out certain parts of the Logic app that you could then parameterize with different IDs if that's the way you wanted to do it. Azure Logic Apps versus Power Automate. See, this was in our list of questions that people might ask us when we started. So, Sanal, thank you. I'll answer that one unless John or Derek wants to take it. But the general way to think about Logic Apps versus Power Automate, you can probably tell from the way in which they look, is the Logic Apps and Power Automate have a similar underlying platform. There are differences, but basically they came from the same place. However, the real key difference with Logic Apps versus Power Automate, and sometimes they can work together, is who they're aimed for. Power Automate, part of the Power Platform, is designed for what we would call citizen integrators, citizen developers. So it's designed to meet the requirements of a much wider range of people than people who write software for a living. It doesn't mean those people can't use Power Automate, but generally the way in which we describe it is if you are if you're doing something for yourself or within a small work group, then Power Automate is a good way to very quickly automate a series of steps, share that with others, and make that part of your job easier. If you're building an application, if you're building something that is going into a DevOps pipeline, if you are doing something that's automating a bunch of virtual machines or infrastructure, if you're doing professional work, then you should probably be using Logic Apps. Doesn't mean that there aren't scenarios where the two work together. For example, using Logic Apps to do a bunch of the backend application processes and using Power Automate talking to the APIs that run them. So that's generally how we would see those differently. It's, Logic Apps is the professional developer, professional IT pro tool, whereas Power Automate is designed for a whole bunch of different users across the business to be able to automate stuff easily. Hope that answers your question. Anybody else want to take any of these? I'm just reading through.
Yeah, I will take the next one. So I have Wei Dong asking, what are the options to call Logic Apps securely from Azure REST APIs? Well, so you have a few different options. I mean, obviously there's the REST API that you can use, and then to authenticate, you essentially need the OAuth token. There is an ARM client that is available on GitHub that will help you to do that, and it's very easy to use. I will add a link right after. There is also obviously the Azure PowerShell that will help you to be able to do and interact with the Logic App APIs, and on top of that, we also have different languages SDKs that you will be able to use as well. Also, so if you're inside Azure portal and you just want to make one really quick call, so if you can find a cloud console just left to your sign-in account, right on the upper right corner, and from there you will connect to Cloud Shell, which is already authenticated, and you'll be able to make REST calls from there securely and very easily.
Cool. Thanks, Derek. We've got a question here from Anonymous. With Azure Functions, we could secure an HTTP triggered by setting CORS and Azure AD auth. With Azure Logic Apps, we need to implement all of this. Are there any plans in the future? My memory escapes me. I think this was using the function proxies features. So generally, there's a couple of ways you can do this. Obviously, we are in the process of adding HTTP OAuth support, so you can obviously call out to Azure AD to do that. However, I think for most cases, when you want CORS support and you want Azure AD auth, so you want to do three-legged OAuth in front of your Logic App, then a really good way to do that would be to put that Logic App in front behind Azure API Management. Azure API Management is now available in a serverless SKU as well as the dedicated SKUs that it had before. So I don't think there's no longer not a good reason to perhaps put that in front of Logic Apps. So then you have a very consistent way to manage CORS, a consistent way to manage OAuth authentication before you trigger off your Logic App, and you're kind of separating that authentication and HTTP management work from the kind of logic of the Logic App. That would be my suggestion in that case. Okay, just looking through. John, any that stand out for you to answer?
Well, I'm just looking to see why I can't see anyone's answers. I'm not sure which I can see Derek's, but not yours. You need to make sure you answer it and then click publish and then answer it so everyone can see the answer. Otherwise, you just.
I'm just going through the publish queue. Aha, that's why. You're
just sending an answer privately to the person who asked the question. Otherwise.
Yeah, no, I understand. We're working with the tech, but no, I'm just answering verbally, so that's probably why we're not saying. I'm just looking in the publish queue.
That as well.
That doesn't help to identify which ones we haven't answered. We will type answered in chat with that one. Then we can track them. I mean, it's lovely that everybody's asking lots of questions.
I will take the next one. So we have Anonymous asking, how can you deploy and run Logic App? What are the deployment options and hosting options? So hosting options, we have the Logic App consumption plan. So this is pay-as-you-go platform as a service. You only pay for the actions that you execute. On top of that, we have integration service environments in which you pay a fixed monthly cost, but you get your own dedicated compute and storage, and you can run as many logic app executions that underlying resource can support. In terms of deployment, you also have a multitude of options. Obviously, you can start from within Azure portal using the using the Logic App Designer inside the browser to create and author your workflow. From there on, you have options to use either Visual Studio or Visual Studio Code. So you can do this outside of a browser and have access to the file that you can then put into source control. When you deploy, you can either deploy that directly from within Visual Studio or Visual Studio Code using the built-in deployment tools, or you can call the Azure PowerShell or REST APIs to start an ARM deployment. But if you put that into source control, you will also be able to leverage either Azure DevOps or GitHub Actions to call into Azure Resource Manager as well.
Cool, thanks, Derek. There's a question here from Eric Acker. Hi, Eric. Thanks for your question. In the designer, is it possible to turn off the dynamic formula editor on an ad hoc basis because it gets in the way? The answer to that is we're well aware of that, Eric. Understand that problem. You might see the problem creeping up when I do a demo in session later on in the day, because certainly on smaller screens, it can be a problem. We're aware of that. We're actually working on a refreshed design of the designer that kind of takes that problem and fixes it fundamentally. So we hope to some more details on that soon, and then I think that really fixes the problem you're talking about there.
I'm just looking through the question list. So someone's asking, is there a public roadmap for updating the Logic App, for updating upcoming Logic App enhancements or new change connections? So yes, there is a public roadmap tool for Azure. That's pretty sparse, but we also have, so you can search that by Logic Apps or any other service, but what we also have is release notes, which we publish every 2 months out of all the changes that we made to Logic Apps and associated connectors over that 2-month time period. And it's just fresh in my mind because I think, Matt, aren't you up to do that one next?
We should discuss. Yes, that's
yeah,
right.
you'll see, and you'll see that gets published out as well. I'll just find a link for it and paste it into the chat. But that's something you can subscribe with an RSS reader to as well, so you can automate pulling down the latest and greatest features.
Thanks, John. We've got a question here from Carlo. Question about tooling. When will the editor designer for VS Code be available? I don't want to spoil the surprise, but there is a build on demand session, build on demand 127 if you want to go and watch it, or you can watch my live broadcast this evening, where we show you an early peek at the designer running in VS Code. So you can go and look at that session now. It's about a 20-minute demo that will take you through that release that will be coming soon. There's a whole bunch of other features that come with that as well. It's not just the VS Code designer, but I don't want to spoil the surprise too much for you, so I suggest going and watching that session. But yes, you will be able to later on this year use the designer in VS Code.
Somebody was asking a related question about where can I run Logic Apps. Not sure how you want to handle that one, Matt.
Yeah, you can find it. So where can I run Logic Apps? So at the moment, obviously, there's 2 options for running Logic Apps. You can run it in the serverless tier public service. You share the infrastructure with others and you just pay for what you use. The other option is you can run Logic Apps in what we call an integration service environment. This is effectively a dedicated version of Logic Apps. This allows you to do things like, well, you won't have noisy neighbor problems, or you're not sharing that infrastructure with anybody, but it also provides functionality for virtual networks. So you can go and talk to assets that you have on premises, and we have a bunch of connectors for those assets like SQL Server, like file system. The other thing I was just talking about, the demo we're going to do of the kind of the what's coming in Logic Apps. What we'll be doing later on in the year is bringing Logic Apps, allowing you to deploy to containers so that you can then deploy Logic Apps where you wish. Now, this is still a little way out for us being able to fully ship it. But again, in the demo I show in the recorded session, you can see how we're doing that, and then that gives you an idea of where we're going. The exact details are TBD, including things like exactly how pricing and things like that will work, but giving you an idea that Logic Apps will soon be something that you can deploy in many different places, on premises, anywhere where you can run a Docker container or Kubernetes that allow you to then choose how you want to deploy Logic Apps and use it.
Will there be a cheaper way to run inline JavaScript other than the integration account step? So I think the short answer is yes, but it's also worth calling out that although you need integration account right now to do this, you can use a free integration account to do that. So just the mechanism by which it works requires one, but you don't need to pay for an integration account to use that feature. But related to what Matt was just talking about, and without saying too much right now, and tune in later tonight for more details, there'll be improvements to code integration with Logic Apps coming very soon.
Yep, I will take the next few. So we have a question on, can we systematically get the HTTP request URL from the trigger? I want to pass that into some other actions. So please take a look at the link. But this callback URL is what you are looking for. Alan asked about error correlation. So client tracking ID is what Logic App Engine will preserve and pass through all its chain of actions, and even when calling other workflows. So a lot from Toon should help you with that. And then last question, is it possible to create your own Logic App templates? Yes, all the Logic App templates are open sourced on our GitHub repository. So the link is provided just underneath the answer. Please take a look, and you should be able to submit a pull request for the template that you create. We'll review and make available for everyone to use.
You said you had two, Derek. No? Still there?
Hello?
Hey, Derek. You said you had two questions to answer.
Oh.
Or was that a composite answer?
Yeah, there were three questions that I answered. I just bundled them all together.
So there's one question could use some more information on, but I'll try and answer it. How can we integrate Logic Apps to external AS2 customers using EDI? So we have support for all of that. So we have support for AS2, and we have support for the likely EDI protocols you'd be wanting to send over AS2, like Edifactor and X12. I'll paste in some doc links. But if there's anything specific you were wanting to know about the architecture, or you mentioned the deployment strategies for that, then we actually have example templates on GitHub to show how you can deploy a Logic App that uses the EDI connectivity as from beginning to end, including the integration account with all the artifacts and trading partner management and everything that includes. But take a look at the link and let me know if I've answered the question, or whether you had something more specific around your question that you were asking.
There's a question there from John about what is your development workflow set up for when you are developing Logic Apps. I'm assuming this means how are you doing continuous integration? At the moment, it's very much based around ARM templates. So ARM templates are the way in which you do that. Again, define the Logic App. You can again use parameterization, the parameterization feature within the Azure portal to be able to set those up. You can use Visual Studio to do that, or you can use VS Code the add-in in the current format. I think again, pointing back to what we're going to be showing, what we show in the recorded session and what we're going to be talking about very briefly in the live session tonight, is that the changes we are bringing with Logic Apps running in VS Code is very much going to be around VS Code. If you're a developer, you know, the IDE is the place where you do Logic Apps development, and that's feedback we've had from lots of developers. We'll also show how you have the concept of a local project there, so you can build your Logic Apps together in a project that makes sense by grouping functionality together, then deploy that to your deployment pipeline, as well as between environments and things like that. So I think there's where we are today, ARM templates, using that with your integration pipeline, but I think we're going to be making that experience much better for developers very soon. So please go and check out that session and give us your feedback on what you think of that and how that relates to how you want to do development.
Right. I will take some. We have a question. Is there a cost analysis page Microsoft has based on what you use with Logic App? Yes. If you search Microsoft Azure pricing calculator, you should be able to find a Logic App entry there. And the only information you need to provide is how many actions you plan to execute, and then it will tell you how much it's going to cost. So give that a try.
Question here from John. Have you seen customers using API management as a way of allowing developers to see their enterprise APIs in the portal? Don't mention Logic Apps, but I'm assuming what you mean is allowing, let me just read that and check that I understand what you mean there. API management definitely allows developers to publish their APIs with the developer portal, whether that's internal or external. If you want to take Logic Apps and publish them through that API management front end, so that all the developers see is an API. So if you're using the request trigger in Logic Apps, so it looks like an HTTP API, absolutely that's something recommended. Again, little pointer to what we're showing over build. Soon you'll be able to run those even faster. We're showing a way of running those Logic Apps even faster, and that kind of request response scenario is a really key use case there. So yes, absolutely, would be the answer.
Still loads of new questions coming in.
It's nice to be popular. Just bear with us as we try and chug through them and upvote the ones you really want to see, because we'll hopefully get through them as quickly as we can.
Somebody wants your session link.
I will see if I can find it, but I believe, well, I can say it out loud. So here we are. So if you want to go and see the recorded session, it is aka.ms BOD127. aka.ms. Oh, there we go. I can type it in the chat. There we go. BOD127. I set this up this afternoon. Go and have a look at that. Obviously, don't go and have a look at that until we finished. But when we have, give it a look and see what you think. It's a shared session with API management, talking about how those two services work for developers. So the previous question, hopefully, it'll give you a bit of understanding about API management. But there's a good 15-20 minutes demo of the exciting new changes we're bringing to Logic Apps as part of that. I sounded really cheesy when I said that there. That was very good marketing speak. A lot of
so I will take the next one. We have Matt G asking, a lot of triggers require specific user credential. Is it possible to make Logic App run company-wide without each user needing to enable it? Yes. So there are a few different ways that we have seen customer doing it. One thing to consider is by leveraging policies. So you can, within your Azure subscription, pre-create and authorize the connections that you want your developers to be able to use, and then use Azure policy to lock down the further creation of additional connections. So people will be able to build Logic Apps and use those existing connections that's already created, but they won't be able to connect to their personal OneDrive account, for example.
I'm just going to take a second because one of the engineers has joined us as a presenter. I don't know if you can speak, Lavish, but just wanted to introduce you. And if you fancy taking a question, you're more than welcome if you come off mute.
Hi, good afternoon, folks. My name is Lavish Bansal. I'm a programmer in the Logic Apps team.
Cool. Thanks for joining, Lavish. We didn't think we'd be able to make the tech work, but obviously we have. So if you fancy picking up a question, shout and we'll carry on going through it.
Sure, I'm happy to, but I don't see the list of questions though.
Oh. All right. I'll field you one in a minute. Hang on. There's a question here from John. Can you just use Logic Apps for an enterprise integration environment, or would you recommend in conjunction with the Azure functions doing specific tasks? John, I think as with a lot of the Azure services, sometimes it is hard to work out which bits to use where, but I think that's absolutely a case where you can use the two together. The thing we recommend with people to do is obviously you can use Logic Apps to very quickly put together your application, but there are scenarios where you want to go out and be able to write code. And obviously we have the inline code function at the moment that allows you to do that. It's using functions in the background, but you can still absolutely call out to a function when you want to write code, when you want to do some calculation that it's easier to write code. And I think we see lots of feedback from customers that say that this is a key use case for them. If you can structure your app with Logic Apps, that gives you a whole bunch of speed in how you're putting things together. You can use the custom connectors or connectors to be able to do some of that dev work that would have been quite time consuming, but is easily repeatable. But if you want to then dig in and do some of the things that are very unique to you that you can write code for, use functions to do that, and then join the two things together. It's a much better together story. So yes, absolutely.
I'm just busy answering the chat, Derek.
I will take the next one. Any idea for getting some interactions with cost management center for sending out email about costs, etc.? Yes, we are working on very similar scenarios that covers not only this, but really about leveraging Logic Apps and help you to solve the DevOps problem you have Azure-wide, and use Logic App to automate things that you have to do by hand. So again, definitely tune into the different sessions that we have, where we will be showcasing that capabilities available pretty soon.
Sorry, just running through questions. You got a lot of questions, and that's fantastic. Just we have to read them. So Eldet's question, I'm just going to publish that. Will you at some point uncouple the ARM definition from the Logic App definition, similar to how functions does, and as such allow us to just update the Logic App definition from CI/CD and create easier deployments? Again, all my answers are go and have a look at the presentation, but yes, that's something that you will find easier with the changes we're making this year with Logic Apps. So absolutely. Then also the local project concept, I think the wider thing of how you manage Logic Apps in the CI/CD construct is absolutely going to be something you find easier with those changes. So please go and have a look at that session and let us know what you think.
Just answering one about the BizTalk connector, asking whether we're supporting it and does it support the gateway? I'm assuming you mean the on-premises data gateway, so the answer is yes.
Let's have a look through. Olivier, you've asked a question about where should I learn about DevOps approach to Logic Apps. That's certainly something we'd like to write more docs on. And again, there will be a lot more docs coming with the update we're making this year. But you can definitely start looking. There's guidance already in the, we have reference architectures in the Azure architecture site. It's around integration all up, but there's definitely guidance in those reference architectures you can go and look at. So if you search for enterprise integration on the Azure architecture site, you should be able to see some guidance there to get you started. Again, at the moment, it's very much around ARM templates and being able to, manage those and version those. But we will be making changes in that area and improve the experience.
I will take the next one. We have Mike asking for implementing something like provisioning for SharePoint Online or Teams. Would there be a cost saving for using Logic App versus Power App? Well, I mean, I think beyond cost saving, I think what you should consider is the auditability of such transactions. If we're talking about provisioning for a new user, let's say, you can definitely do this both in Power Apps and Logic Apps. But with Logic App, you will have the additional capability to go look at all the run histories and see for each of those provisioning attempts, what was the input and output and the outcome of such. Now, you can always use a combination of the two, depends on what specific problem you are trying to solve. Power App is great for gathering user input real time, right? So if you have a tablet where user enters information for you to be able to provision, you can do that with Power Apps, but consider sending that request to a Logic App to handle the actual provisioning.
Cool. I've got another question here from Anthony. Thanks for your question, Anthony. Will there be any support for Swift connectors? So yes, there is. This is something we announced. We were working on, I think, September last year. Divya, who's on the chat somewhere, is working on this as part of the Swift support we're doing. So we did make an announcement. I think if you go and search on Logic Apps Swift support, we're still reasonably early in that process, but it's something that we plan to add more to over the next year or so, I believe. So it will be coming. It's just not quite there yet.
Yep, that's right. I'm just answering one about Azure AD integration with SQL Server. I think a couple of people have asked that one. So yes, there is SQL AD, Azure AD integrated authentication with the SQL connector now in the Logic App Designer.
I will take the next one. How do you suggest managing and deploying dozens of Logic apps maintained in Visual Studio using source control? The default behavior seems to be one project per Logic app. That feels very cumbersome. Well, you can actually have more than one Logic apps per project. I will admit that the UI isn't immediately obvious you can do it. And all the multiple Logic app will actually be saved in the same JSON file. But if you were to right-click on the JSON file or you open the JSON tree view, you will be able to add additional Logic apps into the same projects.
Vikram's asked a question, is there a framework to unit test the Logic apps? So kind of a two-part answer on that one. The first one is there is support today to allow you to mock within the Logic app. So if you want to be able to, for example, mock the call to the endpoint you're talking to, and then run the Logic app with those mocks set on, you can set the data that you want to pass through the Logic app, so you're only testing certain parts. However, we realize there's a whole bunch more to do with that. So it's a little bit further down the line, but what we're looking at is how we can add support to your IDE so you can easily encode or any other way in which you wish to define. Oops. That was weird. Sorry, I just got. There we go. Hopefully that we didn't completely lose all our chat there. Everybody still there? Yes, there we are. I don't know what happened there. A little technical hiccup. Sorry, where was I? So we're working on we're looking at ways in which you can define unit tests that you want to run on the Logic app, choose which piece of the Logic app you want to test, and give you that flexibility like you would if you were writing your own code. A little bit further off, John. I don't know if you want to add a bit more on that, but yes, it's something we're aware of and something we want to do. Elder has asked a question, why am I so fabulous and how I remain so humble? I think you've got my number then, Elder. No, absolutely, you've got my number.
So I'll take that one.
Sitting all day in a spare bedroom, it's humbling. Thank you, Elder.
All right, I will take next one. We have Eric asking, is it possible to restrict output log for a specific action? So you can use the secure input and output feature that we shipped a few months ago by going into a particular action and going into the settings page. So you will be able to turn a toggle on at which point either the input or output will be hidden from the run view. Now, this applies obviously to all the users. If you want to do this only for a specific set of users, consider offloading that Logic app to a separate child Logic app that you can call into, and then have RBAC rules on that Logic app to only grant access to a specific group of users.
Somebody's asking a question about the SEP connector. I mean, whether they could write all the code instead rather than using the Logic Apps connector. I mean, yes, there would be a lot of code you'd have to write, but that's definitely an option.
Question there from Anonymous. When you run a Logic app, does it tell you which shape did it fail, like a workflow for error debugging? So yes, it does. Easy way you can try that would be to go and have a look, run a Logic app, go and look at the run history, and then you can look at the exact items that went through the Logic app and where it failed. If you want to, you can obviously retry those Logic apps, so you can rerun it. But if you want to put in, do rollbacks work? Well, that depends on the compensation logic you're putting in there, and depending on which systems you're integrating with and how. So that doesn't really happen automatically. You have to think about those use cases. But in terms of being able to see what happened and delve into the Logic app, absolutely, we keep a log of all the things that go into each action and out of each action.
Did you answer this one already? I missed your comment to me earlier, Matt. Someone's asking about, can you have a Logic app and associated function in the same VS solution?
I didn't answer that one. We've kind of answered something similar, and I suppose I'll let you answer that one on if you want.
Yes, just hold on a little bit longer, and you'll see exactly how that's going to be possible. I mean, Visual Studio kind of enables that today because you've got a Logic app project and you can add a functions project to that as well. What we're working on is actually making that a better experience. What else we got?
Carlo's asked a question about, oops, I've published the wrong one, but there we go. I'll answer both of them. We can now develop Logic apps in Visual Studio 2019. Enterprise integration tools are only in 2015. Yes, we're well aware of that, and yes, we're working on fixing it. Exact timing, can't give you that right now, but we understand the problem there and we're working on addressing it. Carlo, managed service identities for connectors such as storage connectors on the cards. other connectors could use the same features the HTTP connector has or authentication. Yes, that's something we're working on this summer. So you'll see more connectors lighting up with that managed identity support soon.
Feels like with a few things we're dancing around. Can Logic Apps provide support for availability zones? The answer to that is the same answer as Bert's given a few times, that we're working on some architectural updates to Logic Apps that is going to make things like that possible.
So Carlos C, thank you for your question, Carla. How should apps be designed? So I mean, they should be giant workflows or break them up as much as it makes sense. I think definitely guidance we put to people is not to try and build huge, hundreds of steps logic apps. I think, there are knock-on effects to doing that in how it runs, and it makes it very difficult to make changes and isolate functionality. So I think there is a certain amount of nuance to it, but trying to keep things small and packaged is probably sensible. I think, very much following the kind of microservice idea, in that you should keep smaller sets of functionality together. Again, the way we see this going forward is, you'll probably develop more than one logic app at a time. You'll develop them in a group, and then you'll publish that group of logic apps. So, and you can do things like have one logic app calling another. So if you wanted the top logic app to be just doing some validation or sorting, and then calling into child logic apps to do the processing, you're absolutely okay to do that, and that's definitely something we would recommend. So yeah, I think keep it small. It probably is going to make you happier. We've got such a long set of questions now, we're just running through them. We've nearly answered half, which is a testament to how much people have lots of questions for us, which is great.
Can you measure Logic Apps performance? Yes, I think the question probably is, how do I need to, or how do I performance test Logic Apps? Because when a Logic Apps runs, we actually show you the timing in the Logic App itself. We show you against each step in the run history, in the monitoring view, how long each step took to execute. If you're looking at doing more fine-grained performance analysis, then I think you would put a tool like Visual Studio test against that to be able to test your Logic Apps, for the performance reasons you're looking for. We don't give any finer kind of granularity inside the monitoring view for that, but you can definitely see the end-to-end time if you test it external to the Logic App with something like a request trigger, for example, where you can measure the number of milliseconds between the request and the response.
Got a question here from Anonymous. As private link is available now, are there any plans to have Logic Apps also have private link capability in the roadmap? Yes, it's on the roadmap. Exact timing and details to be sorted. But yes, expect to see us talking about that later in the year.
We'll take next one. We have Anonymous asking, the DevOps trigger, like when the work item is created, seems to only be able to monitor one project at a time. Is there a way to extend that to multiple projects? So whenever we're talking about having an event-based trigger monitoring multiple projects, the workaround usually is to use a request trigger and manually create the webhook subscription on the service side. And DevOps allows you to do that. So if you start with a request trigger in Logic App, make a note of the URI, and go to DevOps, go to the webhook configuration, and just say whenever a new item is created, send a webhook notification to this endpoint, and rinse and repeat this for all the project that you need to do, and you have a single logic app handling multiple projects.
Just a question there from Anonymous. I've seen it a few times. Version control. Yes, Logic Apps are versioned. So if you go into the Logic Apps portal, you'll see a versions link on the left-hand side menu. So you can see, I believe we store 3 months of versions. However, generally, if you're building an application, we would recommend you're using a proper DevOps CI/CD pipeline. And use that as your proper version of changes you made. The versions ability within the Azure portal is great if it's more of a kind of an infrastructure piece you're doing, or if you just want that as an additional way to look at what versions have been deployed. But yeah, make sure you're doing proper DevOps around Logic Apps. Normally our advice. Sorry, the more questions you ask, the slower it takes us to get to the new ones. So bear with us while we have a look here. Carlos, can I get I'll publish this one. Can I get a look at the focus group around Logic Apps and functions? Because it's full. Huge apologies on that. I don't know actually how big the focus group is. Again, I think the guidance there is go and have a look at the live session this evening, and the recorded session. I posted a link to that. That will give you an idea of where we're going there and what that focus group is really about getting feedback on. But you can always take a look at that and drop us a line with feedback as well.
So KP's got a question. I see the question isn't getting answered. KP, I see there's a delay in Power Automate picking up when creating record, but not when we do it in Logic Apps. Could you add a question that's more specific in terms of what the connector is and what the difference in behavior you're seeing between Power Automate and Logic Apps? That would help us answer the question for sure. Will we see a Linux gateway soon? That's an interesting question. Nothing on the roadmap that I'm aware of, but we can certainly check with the gateway team. Kind of curious whether others have a similar need for that. Directionally, what we're wanting to enable is, besides private link that Matt mentioned, looking at better or broader support for VNet integration, and whether you'd still need a gateway support, whether it's Linux or Windows for your scenarios, or whether you'd prefer to have VNet integration instead.
Jim Hart has asked, can Logic Apps be spun up from a multi-tenant application, passing in a user's tenant's information and execute an instance of the Logic App per user tenant? That's pretty complicated. I don't see any reason why you couldn't do that. It really depends on your access restrictions on those tenants and things like that. So, for example, if we think about what you've asked there is essentially, can I deploy an ARM template with some parameters to a user's tenant? Yes, you should be able to, as long as you have the permissions. I think it's probably not the simplest thing in the world to do, but I believe you should be able to do that. It will just be a case of creating that base template, recording the values and pulling them out, and then using that for your automation with ARM. But interesting scenario. So I think we've got 5 minutes left, so let's just try and get through as many as we can. KP's question. Oh, I see there's a delay in Power Automate picking up when creating records for Dynamics 365 Finance Operations Connector, but if we use Logic Apps, is that getting solved? So I think what your question there is the trigger value is taking some time to execute. I don't know the specifics of that one. I don't know if.
Yeah, I've kind of replied in the one above.
Oh, sorry.
For something we should follow up offline. There shouldn't be any difference in behavior on the face of it, so we need to dig into exactly what's happening there. There are different limits and throttles which may be influencing the behavior between the two offerings, but that would be only if you have a very high number of runs or very high throughput. If that's the case, and that may explain it, but otherwise you shouldn't really be noticing a drastic difference between the two.
Anonymous was, what was the name of the session later today? So it's a live session. I can't remember the exact name of it, but the session code is INT174, I think. There's three sessions of that type, so pick the one that works best for you.
We have a question. Is it possible to trigger Logic App based on Azure Resource Update or deployment? The answer is yes, by using the event grid trigger. So check that out.
Somebody's asking about custom connector deployments. I think the answer is yes, but it's not as easy as it could be. But I think actually reading the question, it looks like you're wanting to automate the connector creation from the Swagger file itself. We have heard that feedback before, but I don't think that's currently possible to do that because it's all in the UX, the way you import the Swagger file in terms of the connector creation experience. So there's no way of creating a template to automate that. I don't believe.
Yeah, I mean, I think it may be possible with a few more actual steps. At the end of the day, a custom connector is just another Azure resource that you can deploy using ARM template. The problem is though, in the UI, it will give you options to upload or reference a URL for the Swagger file, but we actually grabbed that and inlined the Swagger into the deployment template for you. So you will essentially have to do that yourself. Right? So imagine if you are doing this with Azure DevOps, you will have to have a custom build process that essentially download the Swagger as an artifact and then construct the ARM template within DevOps and then deploy it together.
Cool. Final question, because we are out of time, unfortunately, but is there a YAML channel for Logic Apps? Yes, there is in Azure Custom Connection. You should find us in, I think, integration. Yeah, so if you're part of that, you should be able to do it. There you go. We answered 2 more questions than were asked. So apologies if we haven't got to your question. There is another session like this, if it works for your time zone, at the sprightly hour of 5:30 in the morning Pacific time. So we're probably a lot more energetic in this one than we will be in that. But you're welcome to post your question there. But apologies if we didn't get to it. You can always reach out to us at things like Twitter or drop us an email and get your answer that way. I'm just gonna switch back to this. So thank you. There's evals for this, so we really appreciate your evals if this was useful. So we know this is the sort of thing we should do again. And enjoy the rest of the build, and we'll see you again. See you again soon. Thanks very much.
Yeah, thanks everybody. Thanks for joining.